Can I ask you something?
Yes, sir.
Since the war in Israel began, and since the war in Ukraine began, you've had quite a lot of people who are very against both in different ways.
Yes.
Do you think you've had enough people on who are supportive of either war?
I don't know that word enough, if that's a good word.
Let's say enough people who are on the side of Israel instead of wild critics of Israel.
Well, I've had a few. I mean, I believe God Sad is on the side of Israel.
For sure.
Jordan is on the side of Israel.
You had Mike Baker, Coleman Hughes.
Yeah.
Coleman did it for like 20 minutes. So it wasn't why he was here.
No. I mean, none of them. And none of them is why they're here. You know? It's a good question.
Do you think you've tilted one way?
Me personally?
No. Just with the guests you've had.
The guests? Yeah, probably more tilted towards the idea that perhaps the way they've done it is barbaric.
Mm-hmm. But why do you think that is? Just out of interest. I'm just interested in your selection of guests because you're like the world's #1 podcast. So
yeah, it's not. I don't think about it that way. I just think I'd like to talk to this person.
But can I just? Sorry, it's your show. But
sure.
If you're going to interview historians of the conflict or historians in general, why would you get somebody like Ian Carroll or?
Yeah, but Ian Carroll, I didn't bring him on for that purpose. I brought him on because I want to find out, like, how does one get involved in the whole conspiracy theory business? Because his whole thing is just conspiracies.
Sure.
You know.
But do you have any? I mean, there's been a tilt in the conversation, in both conversations, in the last couple of years. And it's largely to do with people who have appointed themselves experts who are not experts.
You mean like Ian? I don't think he appoints himself an expert in anything.
Who's that other dude who thinks he's an expert on Churchill?
Daryl Cooper does not think he's an expert.
In fact, I think it's everybody else is always calling him an expert, and he's like, I'm just a history
Have
nerd.
you ever absorbed any of his material? Have you ever consumed any of his podcasts or anything like that?
I tried.
Yeah?
It's pretty hard to listen to somebody who says, I don't know what I'm talking about, but now I'm going to talk. Or I don't know about this. Or I'm not capable of debating this historian, but I'm going to just tell you what I think.
Yeah, but that's not exactly what Daryl was saying. I mean, Daryl's point of view, however you feel about this, what Daryl is saying is he doesn't really like doing debates. He likes to do long format stuff where he can really explain his position.
If you throw a lot of shit out there, there's some point at which I'm just raising questions is not a valid thing. Mm-hmm. You're not raising questions. You're not asking questions. You're telling people something.
Do you think Daryl's doing that?
I think there's a whole bunch of guys doing that.
I think
Dave is doing that, very obviously. Dave's a comedian, but he's now mainly talking about Israel.
No,
I don't know if I'm mainly talking about Israel.
That's all I see you on the internet doing.
Yeah, but that's you.
Well, that might be what you've seen.
It's
but
just
I don't
you
think that's.
consuming clips.
But that is also your shtick now, isn't it?
Well, what do you mean by that's my shtick?
Well, you're not a geopolitics guy in general, are you?
I don't even know exactly what you're asking.
I'm saying you've decided, being a comedian, you've decided now to become somebody who talks about Israel and the conflict.
I think you're incorrect. I don't think it's a decision. I just think you have long-form conversations, multiple of them. It's a huge event that's in the news, so it comes up. I don't think it's a thing. I think if you're on the outside, you'd say, oh, look, they're trying to get attention by talking about this very polarizing issue publicly. That's
you do get attention from that. If you'd spent the last year speaking about Myanmar, you would not be on my lips.
Yeah, but he does talk about Yemen constantly. He talks about a lot of things that aren't in the news.
Well, I tend to talk about the conflicts that my government is directly involved in, which I think is reasonable to me. But I don't quite get, like, what's all the appeal to authority stuff? I mean, what you have to be an expert, or
I think
what
authority
exactly
matters.
I think
authority matters, and I think that if you just throw a lot of shit out there and then say I'm not interested in the alternative views on this, and particularly when it's a counter-narrative that is wildly off. And when you get people... Look, I just feel... We should get it out straight away. I feel you've opened the door to quite a lot of people who've now got a big platform who have been throwing out counter-historical stuff of a very dangerous kind.
You mean Daryl? Are you talking about Daryl?
Daryl, who's the other one?
I don't think Daryl has...
Derek,
I don't think there's anything dangerous about
what's the other guy? Derek... what's his name? Cooper, is it? Which one is it?
No, that's
Daryl Cooper.
Daryl Cooper. Who's the other one? There was one I just checked on the way here. Daryl Cooper, and then... Oh, yeah, Daryl Cooper, Ian Carroll. Look, these guys are not historians. They're not knowledgeable about anything.
No one's calling Ian Carroll
No,
a historian.
but then why listen to their views on Churchill?
Daryl is incredibly knowledgeable.
It's not.
It's just
he's not.
Yeah,
he's not.
Why
He's
do you say
wildly... Several reasons. One is, when he was offered to debate the current greatest living biographer of Churchill, he said, I can't, because he knows much more than me, and I admire his work and I've learned from it, but I can't possibly debate him. That's Andrew Roberts.
Right, but you don't have to be able to debate people to have opinions.
No, you don't have to debate people.
If it's not your thing.
But if you, for instance, but if you say, I've decided that Churchill is the bad guy in World War II.
It's not what he said. It's not what he said.
Neither Carroll nor Cooper have said that?
Well, listen, I don't know what Carroll said, but Daryl Cooper has not said that. What he said was he jokes with his friend Jocko, who's an Anglo-Saxon. He jokes with him. I think that Churchill was the secret villain of World War II. And what he's saying is, by Churchill's actions, the war escalated. He's not saying anything.
He's not just asking questions, then, is he?
No, but
he's got a point
the claim
of view.
isn't that he's just asking questions. Yeah, he has a point of view.
You can explain this better. He literally says
yes,
he's
said
joking.
in the comment, he goes, listen, I'm being hyperbolic. And then he once again disclaimed, he goes, and I'm not claiming Churchill committed the most atrocities or was the worst part. But in many ways, I do view him as the chief villain, as my hyperbolic, provocative statement. But
what's
Douglas,
the point of that?
Well, okay, but Pat Buchanan wrote an entire book on this. Is he not allowed? Is he not an expert? Is he not allowed to be
he's
interviewed?
Certainly not an expert. He can be interviewed. I've watched Pat Buchanan debate. I watched Pat Buchanan debate against Churchill historians, and he was absolutely leveled because he doesn't know what he's talking about.
When did Pat Buchanan debate and get leveled?
About 20 years ago.
I'm just
He
curious.
debated against Andrew Roberts and several other historians at Intelligence Squared in London. I was there. He didn't know what he was talking about. He had a contrary view, and it was interesting and stimulating to hear. But if you only get the contrary view, which is, isn't it fun if we all pretend Churchill was the bad guy of the 20th century, at some point you're going to lead people down a path where they think that's the view. And that's horse shit of the most profound kind.
I don't think that's what he's trying to do.
I think that's exactly what they're doing. And the problem is that because your own platform has come about because you're a very successful comedian and much more, and you do ask questions, and you are interested. But there are a lot of people who have come along, partly I think because they've come on this show, who have come along and they've decided, I can play this double game. On the one hand, I'm going to push really edgy and frankly sometimes horrific opinions. And then if you say that's wrong, they say I'm a comedian.
But wait a minute,
how can you tell me I'm just a comedian?
Well,
I'm just throwing stuff out
What
there.
horrific opinions that's wrong are you talking about specifically?
Once guys like this get into very obvious stuff, which is
guys like Daryl,
the ones I'm describing.
You
very
need to
clear.
listen to Daryl to really understand what he's saying. If you take Daryl's words out of context, Daryl has some of the most nuanced, balanced, and charitable views on all the figures in history.
Well, particularly Hitler, it seems.
No, you're wrong.
True.
You're wrong. He doesn't. What did he call him? How did he describe him?
I think he compared him to a methed out psychopath who was holding an entire nation of people hostage, I believe was the way
He also
put it.
said on here that he wasn't anti-Semitic until the Holocaust. There were no speeches of Hitler's in the 1930s.
No, again, this is
No.
Isn't this on your show?
He said he was not public about it.
He said he was downplaying it to win over. He said there was a period where he was downplaying it to win over popular support in Germany. It was his argument.
There is no historian of World War II who thinks that Hitler was downplaying anti-Semitism in the 1930s. That was what he was doing. He wrote a book about it in the 1920s. He got to power on it, and he grew his power on the back of it. The idea that you can argue that in the 1930s, Adolf Hitler was downplaying the anti-Semitism, there's no historian who would agree with that. So why would you throw out the idea that in the 1930s, Hitler was not being anti-Semitic in public? That was what he was doing in public. He announces to the German parliament what he wants to do. So when you're throwing out claims like he was keeping it down in the 1930s. First of all, what are you doing? And secondly, why?
Okay. I mean, I think that it's kind of hard because I don't even know exactly what Daryl's point on that was, and so I'm not really in a position to argue what he was saying there. I don't think you're giving him the most charitable interpretation.